Hello and welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We're your hosts. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
And we're glad you're here. For the next 15 minutes, we'll talk about a sales issue, big and small, for salespeople, sales leaders, and selling situations. We're glad you're here, and let's get started. Coming at you with part 2 with Chris Spanier, and man, I'm excited to be back. Last week we talked about stories, people. You even dropped in the story brands. We got a little Dan Sullivan, Donald Miller kind of approach. We got a lot of insight last week about how you drive marketing effectiveness with companies, how other companies are currently driving marketing and sales alignment and success in the market. Chris, welcome back. Good to hear you again.
Kevin, Sean, thanks for having me back. We had such a fun time last week. It's just couldn't hold me back from coming back the following week.
Chris, last week when we were talking, we talked a lot about marketing leadership. We got into some Apple ads because we all love the Apple ads. They're fantastic ads back when they were doing really cool ads. What I'd really like to talk about is how can small businesses, the companies that all three of us go after as far as clients, are relatively small companies that are struggling kind of balancing their budgets because they're not very big. How do they create an environment in a small company with not a lot of budgets? They don't have that big Apple marketing ad kind of budget. How do they actually develop sales and marketing focus so that salespeople can be successful, but more than anything, so that the company can be profitable and the company can grow? Help us out on that.
Now, that's a great question, Sean. You know, from working both in corporate as well as with smaller businesses, one of the things that I've noticed, a truism, if you will, is that I think budget and budget discipline always applies, whatever size you are. So if you don't have the budget, you obviously are going to be disciplined because you're watching your dollars. But even at the larger multi-million-dollar campaigns, you still got to be smart about what it is you're doing. It often, where it succeeds, where you set that foundation, where marketing and sales working together ultimately are going to deliver what they need to deliver. It starts with some really good conversations. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are the metrics? Who is the audience? And oftentimes, what I found about even those are fairly basic questions. Joining a company, sitting down and having that talk with the leadership, the sales leadership, the company leadership, the marketing leadership, sometimes you find some differences of opinions, and that's perfectly fine. But what you want to do is make sure everybody's kind of clear, and then you start to make the decisions about, okay, well, here's all the different audiences that you can go after. Who are the ones that we think we're going to have the biggest bang for the buck? Where do we want to try first? I just went through this a couple of months ago where I was onboarding a new client. They have a marketing person on staff, so I was basically just coming in as supplemental help, just kind of an outside perspective. The leader is both the salesperson and the owner. And what we found was that they had some differences of opinion, and that was perfectly fine. And we did it in a very respectful way. But what it allowed us to do is to have this more holistic view of, well, who could we potentially go after, and why do we think these people are important? And I'm guessing there may have been a little internal friction because head of marketing was saying go left, and the owner, who had the ultimate decision making, said right, and the marketer then kind of felt not listened to or devalued. But as they both started to share the insight, and once they had that deeper conversation, then suddenly, then they're like, I get it. And echoing back to our conversation last week, when sales and marketing start talking together and they start planning and supporting each other, then suddenly it's like, you're not the enemy. You're actually an incredible asset and an ally. How do I make better use of you so that we ultimately are successful? So that's what we would see. Once then you start to have those conversations, then it's like, well, if this is what we're trying to accomplish, then how do we get there? So you set your strategy, you set who it is that you're going to talk with, and then you start to actually apply some tactics. Budgets will define what you can do. There's only so much time and dollars that you can spend on things. So there's a gentleman, he's actually from Procter & Gamble. His name is Doug Hall. And Doug left P&G. He was marketing, but he's in charge of innovation. And to give a little plug for him, he's founded a company called Eureka Ranch, which then kind of has evolved into innovation engineering. And I had the opportunity to do some classes with Doug as part of a certification process. But that aside, one of the most powerful things I took from Doug's classes is he had this saying where he's like, if we're sitting around a table and everybody's discussing and debating, and we're doing that for more than 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, he goes, we absolutely have to stop. We have to go do something and get smarter and then come back and make a decision. And when you do this thing, do it so that it's quick and do it that it's inexpensive. So let's get smarter, faster, and cheaper. Then come back and make a better decision. One of the things I found so refreshing about that was one, it put a nice order around, okay, we've got a mental threshold. If we're debating for 5 minutes, well, I think this and I think that, I think doesn't carry the day. We need to get some really hard facts. We need to figure this out. But Doug would always encourage you to go and to do something that gets you greater insights. Maybe it's a mock-up of a website that you do in PowerPoint. Nothing fancy, but does this work? Run it by some people. Maybe it's doing a poll on Facebook, something that gives you some insights that allow you to come back and be a little bit brighter. And then as you take that a little bit further, then you start to put these tactics. And so usually when I sit down with a client and we're doing something for the first time, I'm like, let's do this. We got to give it long enough for it to try to have a chance to succeed. But I want to be watching. Let's decide of our metrics up front. And what are we going to measure? When are we going to measure? And then how much time are we going to give this before we go back and make a decision about whether this is working, or we need to refine it, or we need to move to something else. If anybody hires me and says, Chris, I expect marketing to work 100% of the time, I'm flattered that they think I can do that. But it's usually I have to kind of set expectations. Said we are going to keep getting better. We're going to start at a point that hopefully is going to be pretty good. But to think that we're going to get this right out of the gate, you might get lucky. But anybody that's telling you otherwise, yeah, we're going to bring our processes, we're going to bring our learnings, we're going to bring everything we can to start as high as we can. But you are a unique organization with a unique product, a unique offer, and we need to make sure that we're tailoring it to you because it's not a one size fits all. And usually when you couch it like that, what you start to see then is leadership and other folks around the table, they start mentally opening up. They're accepting of different ideas and challenges. And you do it in a way that's polite and respectful. And certainly you want to listen to their input and to refine and to see what you can do. But ultimately you get folks that were on board and saying, all right, let's try this.
You bring up a lot of points and tools there, and I kind of want to lean into a couple of them. You talked about sales and marketing and a CEO leader and really the differences between sales and marketing. For our listening audience, can you tell them as a marketer what question you wish the sales leader would ask maybe first to open the door? Because I think building the bridge is really a two-person effort. What do you wish we as salespeople would ask you first before we say, how are you getting us more leads?
That is a really great question, Kevin. I don't know if I have a specific question that I'm looking for. I think what I want is a change in the mindset. Because oftentimes in the more challenging situations I've walked into, it's more of an order taker. This is what I want. Get me this. And what I don't think the salespeople will mean, and I have to have a thick enough skin not to take it this way, but oftentimes what that implies is we know how we need to market this. You simply just need to be the execution. And there have been salespeople I've worked with that are outstanding marketing minds. So I certainly am open to that. But I think what I would wish was maybe a little bit more, not humility, but maybe openness to saying, what can we do? How can you make this better? Maybe that's a way to answer your question is, this is where I want to start. This is what I'm thinking. How do we make this better? Or if they don't have that idea, which is perfectly fine, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. How might we get there? Because it invites the dialogue, it invites the discussion, and it invites the exploration. So I think that would probably be my wish.
Yeah, if I'm the marketer, if you and I are on the same team in a business and I'm the sales leader and you're a marketer, I'm going to walk down to your office and say, hey, Chris, some of my goals for this year are to sell more of product line one, product number two, and I've got a team or a couple of reps that are focused on X, Y, and Z. How are you building out marketing assets for that market? Is that where we should start as salespeople? Because I think your insight here would benefit a lot of our listening audience.
I think that would really be helpful. Going back to my comments a few minutes ago, I start talking about what's our metrics, what's going to determine success. And so you've just laid out, I've got 2 reps that are selling this product. I want to see this percentage increase. That very clearly defines how are we going to know if we're successful or not. In my very first job, I actually was responsible for sales and marketing, fresh out of college, internet startup, make it happen. And they didn't give me any goals, which was interesting. I succeeded. I showed up to work. But what I ended up doing was setting for myself, I'm like, I want to double sales in the first year. And we sold $1 million. It was a software company, or software is a SaaS company really before it was SaaS was a term. And we had $1 million in sales the first year. By setting that goal and by having, frankly, control over both sales and marketing, we ended up quadrupling it. We had 4 million in sales by the end of the first year. It was very much the discipline I think both of you bring to the clients you serve of let's set the goals, let's figure out our plan forward. But then from the marketing perspective, that's my litmus test. Are we succeeding? Am I helping your reps to grow? Absolutely.
Very interesting. Thank you for all that. I'm going to take it to slightly to a little bit of a different level. A lot of the CEOs that I work with don't know the difference between marketing and sales. And I'm guessing that you've seen that in some of the small companies that you deal with, where they like marketing and sales are responsible for bringing in revenue. And that's kind of all the CEO understands. I don't understand a lot of small business CEOs. They didn't come from a big corporate environment. They were experts in manufacturing. They were experts in software development, whatever the case may be. And they just saw marketing and sales as that department over there. Now they're starting a company, they have some revenue going on, and they really don't know the difference. How do you help a CEO understand this is what marketing is, this is what sales is, I'll do this, they'll do that, they're my partner. How do you help them go through that process?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So on the one hand, if you've got a CEO or a president who has that mindset, in some ways that's really good because they're already looking at it as a whole. I don't want to necessarily break that up, but it's just like any type of organization that's starting to grow. You're talking about specialization. And I think we touched on this last week, but at a super high level, marketing, we tend to project out. We're talking larger audiences, whereas salespeople have more of the personal relationship and they ultimately bring about the sale or providing the solution to the client. As you talk about it, sometimes, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way at all, but sometimes I look at our sales team and I said, they're another marketing channel. They're the ones helping to take the message out. And just like I'm thinking about like how do I best craft the messaging, the images, the support, whatever it is, whether it's a website or social or a print ad or what have you, it's very much the same thing when we look at the sales organization. How do I best serve them so that they are taking the message and ultimately delivering the value to the client? My advice to any kind of president or CEO that's thinking about this and is starting to realize, okay, it's not just one person doing this. You start to look at really kind of the role they play at the overall customer acquisition to ultimately getting them to be a customer and then a repeat customer and an advocate. They do play a very distinct part in that whole process. So for me, it's the evolution of the organization, especially with a company that's growing. They often will understand or get that sense of, okay, so now Mary is not doing everything. Mary is going to focus on this part, or we're going to bring in Bob, and Bob is going to be part of this part. But having them work together is really key.
Agree. We are very close to the top of our time again. Last week went incredibly fast. We didn't have a chance for you to talk about your company. This one's gone fast, but I got 90 seconds left. In the next 90 seconds, tell us about Chris. Tell us about your history as much as you can in 90 seconds. But more than anything, tell us about your company and what you do for companies today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm Chris Spanier. My company is Carpe Diem Consulting Group. And what we are is a marketing organization that comes along small and medium-sized businesses. And really the best way to think about us is we're a marketing bridge. So oftentimes we'll work with companies that maybe they have one person on staff doing marketing, maybe they don't have anybody, but they're like that president or CEO that you were just talking about, Sean, where they're like, hey, I think we need to be doing some marketing. How do we get there? And they're not quite ready to either add to the staff or have somebody fully dedicated. We serve as that bridge. We help them put marketing processes in place. We start helping them refine the brand. It's kind of like a marketing department on call is a nice way to describe it. I've always been in marketing. I'm one of those oddballs that back in school, that's what I studied. And by gum, that's what I continue to do to this day. Because, just as we talked about last week, I love a good story. And I have been blessed to work with companies that really have great stories. So for me, it's just a chance to get in, to learn more about these folks, and then to help them spread their message. So I just love that opportunity. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with somebody, trade some ideas, share some experiences. So probably the easiest way, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, is just to send me an email. It's Chris at, and then it's cdcg.us. Carpe Diem Consulting Group, cdcg.us.
And for everybody out there in podcast land that's listening to us right now, we want to thank Chris for being on. The show notes, click on the show notes, go to the bottom of the page, and you'll find contact information for Chris on there as well. Reach out to Chris and get some help. Chris, it's been great having you as our guest again for the last episode and this episode. We really do appreciate you. You gave us a lot of your time, and we appreciate that commitment. And thank you very much for being our guest.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast of Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We hope that we were able to share some valuable insight, valuable knowledge with you to make your selling adventures easier and more successful. Please join us every week. We drop these on Tuesday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please subscribe to us in your favorite podcast player. Also, please join us on LinkedIn, where we do a CEO workshop, and that CEO workshop is dedicated monthly to big questions that CEOs are having and how to grow their business and drive sales. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. Thank you very much. Have a great day.